I'm going to show you how to make this classic summer dress. It's perfect for a hot day, fitted on the bodice and then flared out at the skirt. It's got gathers down the centre front here just to give it a nice little detail. And it's just really comfy and perfect for a summer's day. I'm Ali and I've been making dresses both for myself and professionally since the early 90s, and I still love making dresses as much as I did when I first started. This dress is really easy to make. I make it from my fitted bodice block. If you don't already have one, then you can follow the link above or in the description below to make a bodice block. You don't have to use the one from my video. If you have a bodice block from somewhere else, that will work just as well. So as I said, it's really easy to make. I'm going to show you how to draft the pattern, how to make sure it fits, and then how to put the whole dress together, and it's a lot easier than you might think. And then just to show you the back, it is just straight across at the back. If you want to do an adaptation, you could always make the straps halter neck. Lots of variations that you can do from this dress design. Because this is drafted from a block, you don't need to take loads of measurements, but there's just one extra measurement you're going to need. This dress is fitted on the rib cage here, so it goes straight up from the waist to the under bust position where basically the bottom of your bra would be, and then it's shaped from there, and it just gives a really nice bodice shape. So if you are just making it from a basic block, your measurement would go from the bust point to the waist, and this would be kind of a straight line. It wouldn't fit so much. So I'll show you in the video, and I promise it's really easy. This is going to sound more complicated than it is when I'm explaining the measurements. But you're going to need the measurement from your bust point to your waist. So just put a bit of elastic or something like that around your waist at the smallest part, around your bust at the fullest part, and just measure vertically what that is. And then you also need to measure from this under bust position, so basically where you want the seam on your dress to be, so basically where your bra sits. So measure from there down to the waist, and from there up to the bust point. So now that you've got these measurements, all you need to do is add the two smaller measurements together, so the bust point to the under bust measurement and the waist to the under bust measurement, and then you need to subtract the bust to waist measurement, and you should end up with a small measurement. So for example, if the bust to waist measurement is 19 centimetres and then the other two measurements are 10 centimetres and 10.5 centimetres, just add those together and you just subtract the 19 centimetres from the 20.5 centimetres to get 1.5. So you should only end up with a small measurement, but it's essential for getting the shape of this bodice correct. And then I will explain when I'm drafting the video what we need to do with those measurements. Promise, it's really, really easy. So just take those measurements before you get started, and everything else is from your block, and it's really, really quick to draft. And then before you start, just think about how long you want the skirt part of your dress, how low cut you want it to be, how thick you want your straps, how full you want the skirt, all of those things. So it might be worth just trying on some dresses that you have, or if you don't have something similar, popping to a shop and just trying a few things on and just seeing what you want. You can obviously just measure on yourself if you want, but sometimes it's nice and easy just to look at a dress that you already have, which is exactly what I did when I did this. I picked out one of my favourite dresses and I measured the length, I measured the fullness of the skirt, and it gave me a really good idea of what I wanted to do. So you can see here that the skirt part of my dress isn't the same front and back. I have made it slightly shorter at the front to the back. I've added a little bit of fullness to the back as well, just to give it a slightly different look to a skirt that is exactly the same all the way around. But you'll see when I draft the pattern that you can do the skirt shape however you want it. It can be more A-lined, it can be more full, it can have a dipped hem like mine, it could be straight, or it could have an exaggerated dipped hem. You can do exactly what you want with this dress. You could even put a net underskirt under this for a real 50s look. The first thing I've done is I've traced off my close-fitting bodice block. So if you don't have a close-fitting bodice block, you'll need to draft one up. You don't need to do the one from my video. Any bodice block will work. But if you do need one, there's a link above and below in the description. So I've traced this off exactly as it is, and I now need to just make some basic amendments to the fit before I do the styling of this dress. I'm cutting the top piece off here as it's going to be a strappy dress, and this is going to make it quite gapey. If you're familiar with opening up necklines and armholes, you'll know you need to take in a little bit of a dart to stop it being gapey. Because I'm taking so much off, you need to take out quite a bit. So my dart measures 8.5 centimetres, and I'm going to divide that by 3. And that is how much I'm going to make my dart wider. So I'm doing this at the top here. If you are using a different block to mine and your dart's in a different position, you can do exactly the same. If you've got a side dart here, if you're adding 1/3 onto the width of your dart, it's kind of irrelevant where the dart is. It's going to work however you do it. So for example, if I'm measuring, let's find a nice point here. So 5 centimetres is at that point there. If I divide that by 3, I get 1.6 centimetres. And you'll see that if I line the ruler up with there and there, it still meets this bust point. So it doesn't matter how long the dart is, adding 1/3 on is gonna be exactly the same regardless. So that is my new dart width there. So I'm just gonna cross that out, or you can just rub that out, but that's just gonna make sure that this doesn't gape too much. So you might find you need to make your dart a little bit bigger when you try a sample on, but best to do it this size and have to make your dart a bit bigger than the other way around and it's too tight. So this is just a good rough guide that suits most body shapes. The next thing I'm going to do is I want to separate this here where my underbust seam is going to be. So as I explained before, the measurement from your waist to your underbust plus your underbust to the bust point is going to be slightly bigger than just measuring straight from your waist to the bust point. So the difference of mine is 1 centimetre. So let's just write that down there. And the measurement that I took that I want to go from my waist to the underbust point is 10.25 centimetres. So I'm going to draw that in first. And I'm just gonna join that up there and go to the centre front. But I'm gonna just curve it down a little bit here, just because I think it's a nicer shape. So I'm not gonna curve it down much. I'm just gonna draw a little mark there. And that just makes my piece here a little bit curved. And then what I'm gonna do also is I'm just gonna extend this dart straight up here. So if you've got dot and cross, it's great because you can just do it parallel to the dots and crosses. If not, just make sure you measure this so it goes straight up. And then I'm going to cross, I'm going to cross this line out here because I want this fitting close to my body. So that's that part done. I'm now going to take this measurement here, which is 9.5, and I'm just going to draw that across on my back. So this is the piece that's going under the bust that will be part of the skirt, and I now need to work out how to do the top. So this 1 centimetre difference between adding the point to underbust and the underbust to the waist together compared to just measuring in a straight line is 1 centimetre, and that is how far I need to draw down here. So I'm going to just take that measurement there, so it's 9.25, and I'm just going to join those with a dotted line because this is what I'm going to trace off for my bodice piece. And then I need to do exactly the same here. So I'm just going to draw that with a slight curve, and I'm just again doing a dotted line. And this is just so that I can see that the solid line is for this bottom piece and the dotted line is for the top piece. You can use different colours if you want, but I just prefer to just do it with a dotted line. So that's the extra added into the vertical to allow room for the bust, for this to fit perfectly underneath the bust. And what I'm going to do now is the point here where my lines have gone up and they meet this dotted line here, I'm going to join those to the bust point. So again, I'm going to do it with a dashed line just so I know which is which. And then I'm just going to cross out those original points there. So it can get a little bit confusing if you're crossing things out. I would recommend rubbing them out to make it clearer. But when I'm doing the videos, I prefer to cross them out so you can see where the original lines are, just so it can make a little bit more sense. So I'm now ready to draw in the shaping of the top edge of my dress. So I'm keeping it in exactly the same point here on the armhole. And I want it to go fairly low at the centre front. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a line across from the bust point. And then I'm just going to mark that up 2 centimetres. So that is totally up to you where you want to do that. You can do it lower, you can do it higher. It doesn't matter. So what I now need to do is draw in this shape. But I've obviously got this dart stopping me from doing that nice and easily. So what I'm going to do is I need to close up this dart and I need to think about where I'm going to have my seam going. So I want this to continue at a nice kind of natural curve. I don't want it to come right into the armhole here. I want it to go into my top seam, but I just don't want it going straight up. So I'm going to find a place that's midway between this new dart position and my armhole. And I'm going to just draw that up from the bust point there. And that's going to be where my seam is. This can easily be changed when you try out a sample. So the next thing I'm going to do is I need to close this dart up and open up on this seam. So let's just separate the front and back for now. And I'm going to put the back aside and just work on this front for a minute. So I'm not going to cut everything out yet. I'm just going to cut the bits I need to. So I'm going to start by just cutting down this line here. So that is where my seam is going to go, my princess seam. And then I need to close this dart up. So I just need to cut down one side. So I'm going to cut down here. And now to close it up, all I need to do, just make sure it's still connected at the bust point. You just need to snip it enough so that it does swivel around nice and easily. So I'm just going to position that and close that up. And now this is going to cause confusion, so I'm just going to cut the excess off. I'll just leave enough behind so it holds it together well. So that is now ready to draw in that top shape. So you can see it's quite a big dart, but that's going to stop any gaping there at all, which is perfect. So I need to draw this shape in. So you need to know how high up you want this to go. So again, this is totally, oops, let's just stick that little bit down there. So this is just totally up to you. You can have it going fairly straight. You can have that going up quite high. It's just personal choice what you want. This might be dictated by what shape bra you wear if you want it to cover bra straps. So for me, just for this sample, I'm going to draw this up 10 centimetres from the bust point. So it's going to be exactly the same on both pieces there, because these pieces are going to join up. They're going to join up there, and my strap, I want it to be on this side. I like my straps quite far to the side, and it also helps cover a bra strap. So it's totally up to you where you put it. And then I'm going to draw a little line here perpendicular to this seam, and I'm going to put a little mark 2.5 centimetres across, because that is the width of the strap that I'm going to have. So I need to get this the right shape. So if I close that up like that, that's kind of how it's going to sit on. I don't want my strap coming off at this funny angle. I want it going straight up. So I'm just going to reshape that going across like this. And that's the width there. And then I'm just going to draw that into my armhole. I might decide that I want this higher or a different angle once I try a sample on, but that's the whole point of doing a sample. So I'm going to work with that for now, and then I need to draw a curve that goes from this point here to my centre front drop. So this looks like quite a drop to me, but I'm going to draw it in and see how it looks. So that's how that curve looks. And that's probably a little bit more exaggerated than what I want. So I'm actually just going to draw that up a little bit, and I'm going to rub this line out and just redraw it. You have to play around with these things, because until you actually see them, you don't know how it's going to look. So that, to me, that looks a lot better. I want a nice shape. I want this to show a little bit of cleavage, but I don't want it too extreme. So that is the beginning now of my top piece of the front. I then just need to continue this across the back, which is going to be a lot easier. So I want the centre back to be a little bit lower than the side. So I'm just going to do that by eye, and I'm going to draw in that piece there. And then I need to just join this up here. Again, I'm just going to do this by eye, and that's curved a little bit there. So the back, nice and straightforward. And then what I'm going to do now is I'm going to measure from the shoulder to this point here and just make a note of that measurement. So that's 13 centimetres, and that's the front. And I'm going to do the same on the back, and my strap will be somewhere around here. I'll decide that when I put my dress on later, and that measurement is 21. So the total strap length is going to be around 34 centimetres. Once you try it on, you can always adjust it. It's not going to be any longer, but you might want it slightly shorter just because this is a little bit more open. Now on the back, I need to do the same as the front. Obviously, I've taken all of that off, and this is going to gape a little bit, but nowhere near as much as the front. But I'm going to just basically double the width of this little bit here. I'm doing it by eye because it's such a small measurement. And then I'm just going to join this point here to the new point at the top on both sides. So it's just making sure that that doesn't gape too much there. And you can tweak that if you need to. So these bits are now ready to cut out. So these are both the centre back pieces, and I'm going to write top and skirt, just label them whatever makes sense to you. And this is the side back, top and skirt. So I'm going to add the skirt part to these in a second. So these are all now ready to cut out. I've got all the back pieces cut out, but as you can imagine, the front's going to be a little bit more complicated. So let's just do this one piece at a time. So I don't need any of this at the top. So let's just get rid of that. Just to get it out of the way, I'm just going to keep this little bit here with the details of my strap. So I can get rid of this. And now what I need to do, I'm going to use these pieces here. So I'm going to label these. So that is the centre front, and that's going to be cut on the fold. And that is the side front. I'm going to cut those out in a minute. But before I do, I'm going to trace these two top pieces off. So I'm using just a bit of the paper that I've just cut off. You always need to keep these bits because they're handy. And the first piece I'm going to trace off is this side front piece here. So I'm going to just line up the dot and crosses perfectly. And then I can just mark the top and bottom of my side seam. Any straight lines like that are nice and easy to do. I'm going to do the same here. I've just marked the top and bottom of these points, and I'm going to join that with a straight line in a sec, and then I can just then draw the curve in. So I'm just tracing around the shape that I drew here. And then just make sure you mark the correct point here. So it's where the dotted line comes down and joins this lower seam line here. So it's that point there, and I'm going to join that with a straight line and then draw the curve in. And then this piece here, I'm just going to trace that off exactly how I drew that in. So let's just take that out of the way. So I'll start with my side seam. And then I'll draw these in exactly as it came from that pattern. And you can see there's a real point there. And all I'm going to do is just take that little bit off so it's a curve. It's not going to make a difference to the size. We're only talking millimeters. So just take that point off, and it depends what your bust shaping's like as to how much of a point that does make. So this is my side front top piece, and I'll cut that out in a second. I am going to trace this one off, and then I need to open it up with some slash and spread for the gathers, but I'm going to just trace it off as it is first. So I'm going to draw the centre front line in first because that's nice and easy, and then I can line that up here, and then I just need to trace the rest off. So I need to go with the bottom dotted line here. I'm going to just join that with a ruler in a sec. and the same as on the other one. And the same as on the other one, where the dotted line that comes down meets this bottom line here, which I've just realised I've drawn in the wrong one. So let's cross that out. Just shows how easy it is to make a mistake. So make sure you draw that in the right place. And then I've got my bust point there. And this is the edge of the dart here. And then I've got my curve for the neckline. So I can now take that from underneath and I can join all of this up. And that's my centre front piece there. The only thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add my gathers in a minute. And the last two bits of the front are my little pieces here. So to avoid confusion at this stage, I am going to now rub these lines out. So that dotted line is what I needed for the top piece. I don't need that anymore. So I'm going to get rid of that. And I need to make sure I cut on the correct lines here. So it's this one and this one. So before I detach anything else, I'm going to cut up those to avoid any confusion. And now I can cut these out. They look like little tiny pieces at the moment, but obviously the skirt is going to be drawn onto these in a minute. That's all the pieces now for the bodice. I just need to open this up for the gathers and I need to draw my strap. So I'm going to put all of these pieces aside for now and I'm just going to work on this one. So before you do anything, you need to make a note of this measurement. So for me, from the top to bottom is exactly 14 centimetres. That was just luck that that was an exact number. So I need to do some slash and spread to get my gathers on the front. So because there's a lot going on there, I'm just going to turn it over and draw this on the plain side. So you want to do a few lines going across that are fairly evenly spaced. You don't need to measure them for them to be exact. So I've drawn 5 just because it distributes the gathers nicely. You can do more if you want. I wouldn't do any less. And you want to cut that up to that line there, but don't separate these pieces. Just cut it so it's attached by about 1 millimetre. And that can now open up, and this is where the gathers are going to be. So I want quite a few gathers on mine. So I want this to become about double the size of the measurement that I made note of. So let's just lay this on here. And I'm just going to stick the bottom one down to get started. And then what I want to do, I want to get my double measurement of that, so 28 centimetres. And I just want to get a rough idea of where that's going to sit. And that's up here. So I'm just going to draw a little line. And this is where I want this to open up to. So my pieces obviously aren't going to go all the way up to there, but I'm going to just spread these out to a point where this point here basically follows onto that line. So if you imagine if you're drawing a line from this point that I marked down to here, it goes through this centre front top point here. I really hope that makes sense. So I just now need to evenly spread these out so that I can then draw in my curve. So I've done this. I'm not happy with how much bigger this bit is here to the rest of them. So I'm going to just bring that up a little bit, not loads, just to make it look a more regular shape. And now I can just draw in that curve. And then this is the new centre front piece. So I literally just need to draw around this. This piece at the top here is exactly just around there. This seam just needs to follow this point here. And don't draw right into these because they're straight lines. Just curve that out. And then the same on this side. You just need to draw a nice continuous line in a nice curve to go from top to bottom. And now I can take this off. And what I always try to do is keep this, don't just take it off and screw it up, because if this doesn't work out, you've still got your original piece that you can try at these gathers again. So I'm just going to take all of this off. It's a bit of a pain with the tape, but it's worth doing, and just stick this back together just in case I need it. And that's that now kept aside. So you don't need to make sure that's put together perfectly, because chances are you're not going to need it, but it's always good to keep it in case. So this now looks like quite a strange shape, and that's why you have to go through this process to get this, because there's no way on earth you would have worked out what shape to draw this without first making this piece and then doing the slash and spread. So this piece here needs to gather up to this measurement here. And if you feel like there's too many gathers, then you can just either adjust this or go back to this and open it up a little bit less, or vice versa. If you want more gathers, just open it up a little bit more. So I'm just going to make a note on there to gather to 14 centimeters, and that is my center front top piece. When you make these kind of pieces, they do look really weird shapes, so you just have to trust that this is right, and you'll soon know when you make the sample up if it is or it isn't. But just make sure both of these are nice smooth curves and not a series of lines. And this is the very last piece, which is the strap, and I'm just using the measurements I've taken from here. So 34 centimeters from front to back, and it's 2.5 centimeters wide. Obviously that's completely up to you what size you do the width of your strap. It doesn't even have to be the same front and back. You can vary this if you want to. So that's all my pieces now. I just need to cut these last two pieces out, and I'm going to make a sample and see how this fits before I do the skirt part of the pattern. And I would strongly suggest doing it in this order, because it's a lot easier to adjust this before you do the skirt than after, because you're just working with these little pieces. If you don't know how to put the sample together, just watch the video through to see how I sew this up, and then you can just follow that for the sample. So this is all my pieces now for my sample. So I've not put a seam allowance at the bottom of these skirt pieces, but I need this to sit on my waist, as that's where it's then going to flare out from. I've put a seam allowance on the top of these pieces though, and all the sides of them to join it all together. The centre front is cut on the fold, and then on the top pieces I've not put a seam allowance on the top, because I want to see exactly where that edge is to see if I'm happy with it. But seam allowances to sew it all up and pin it at the centre back, and then the centre front one, which is cut on the curve, seam allowance on this front here, and that's the bit that needs to gather up. So I'm just going to sew all of that together now, just to see how it fits. I'm going to stay stitch each of these pieces around the top before I sew it together, because when I try it on, I want to make sure nothing has stretched, particularly these bits at the front. The back isn't going to stretch much because it's almost on the straight of grain, but obviously this one isn't. And then I'm going to sew this centre front together and just gather it up to 14 centimetres to see how it looks. Obviously I'll go into a lot more detail when I show you how I make the dress up. And then obviously this is just the strap and needs to join on. So I'm going to do that now and see how it fits. So this is my sample made up, and you can see by the pins I've already tried it on. So this should fit really well. If your bodice block fits to start with, you really shouldn't have too much of an issue with fitting this. So these pins here are the only fit thing that I need to change. And this was the bit at the point of doing the dart. If I get my pieces back, I'm going to just use this piece that I did before I added the gathers down the front. And you remember I made that dart a bit wider. I added a third again, and I did say you might need to add a little bit more, but best to have it gaping and do this than it be too tight. This would have been a bit of a pain to fit if it was too tight. So this is basically how much I need to take out. So I'm just going to take that out of this piece. I'm not going to adjust the front piece, because where that seam sits is absolutely perfect. I'm going to take it out of this piece here. So basically I just need to measure that. It's exactly 1 centimetre, and I need to take double that from this piece here, because that's obviously measured, folded. So I'll do that in a second. And then the only other thing with this is I just want to lower this a little bit here. I just felt like it was a little bit sensible. So I'm just going to lower it literally 3/4 of a centimetre, and just take a little bit of that curve off because it's very rounded and it just looks a little bit too much. And if I lower it here, that's going to make it even more curved. So I'm just going to reshape that as well. But the rest of this fits really well. I'm really happy with where the top edge of this is. You might want to go down a little bit lower, but I always want to make sure I can cover my bra. My straps seemed slightly too long, but I can adjust them when I make my dress, because when they're sewn out of something with a bit more rigidity, they might not need to go any shorter. But the positioning was perfect for covering my bra straps, so that's great as well. And that's all I need to do. As I said, if your bodice block fits you before you do this, this should fit perfectly. Now, the only place where it's likely to not fit perfectly is this bit here. And that's where we added a little bit of height to it so that it fits around the bust. So just make sure this seam is where you want it. And if it's not quite right, if you feel like it's not sitting close to your body, then you might need to just play around with that. If you need any further help with bodice fitting adjustments, then you can look at my separate video. There is a link above and in the description. But as I said, this should fit pretty close from that bodice block. Just make sure this seam is how you want it. You can always unpick this seam here and put it on and just adjust that when it's on and work out where it needs to be, and then just change these pieces and these pieces here accordingly. So if you need to add more in, just add it in here. You'll add it to the top of this one or the bottom of this one, or take a bit out. So that's really it. So I'll just quickly show you how I'm going to change that dart and reshape this bit, as these are the bits for most people that I imagine you might need to change. And also just check you're happy with the amount of gathers. If you want more or less, then you can either slash and spread the piece that you've made here, or you can go back to the original one that you want. I'm really happy with this, so I can now get rid of this piece. So I'm gonna just first do this little bit of dart here. So this is my bust point, and I need to come from the armhole, and I'm taking 2 centimeters out because it measures 1 centimeter right on the edge there. It seems quite a lot, but it's amazing how much you do need to take out when you are doing this kind of style dress. As I said, I could do a video saying to take a lot more out of that dart in the beginning, but not everybody needs to take loads out. It really depends what your body shape is. And now that that's done, you can see it doesn't quite match there. So I can just stick a little bit of paper behind there to match that up. And if this goes too pointy, you can always just take the tiniest little bit off here. I'm not even going to draw this. I'm literally just shaving that little piece off of there. And then I'll just stick a little bit of paper in there. So that's that done. And the only other thing for me is that I just wanted to lower this very slightly. So 3/4 of a centimetre. So I need to take 3/4 of a centimetre off this as well. So that's no longer gather to 14 centimetres, but 13.25 centimetres. So I'm taking off from here, and I want to take a little bit of the curve off here as well. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to draw a straight line across, and then I know I want to go somewhere in between. And I am just doing that by eye. So that just looks like a little bit less of a curve. And I can just trim that off. And there we go. That's that piece done. So I am good now to get on with doing the skirt part of this pattern. So now that I'm going to do the skirt part, all 4 of the top bodice pieces can be put aside, as can the strap. So these are all 4 parts for the panelled skirt. So the centre front, which is going to be cut on the fold, the centre back, which will have the zip in, and then the side front and side back. So I'm just drawing a little diagram first to show you what I need to do. So basically for each of these pieces, I'm going to add plenty of fullness. So I'm exaggerating a little bit just so that you can see. So the side back and the side front are going to be like this. And then the centre back is obviously going to be seamed at the back, so that goes straight down and it's going to be like this. And then the same for the centre front, that goes on the fold, so it's going to be like this, and I add a lot of fullness. I'm going to make my back a little bit longer than the front because I like a dipped hem, So this piece here needs to be a little bit longer than the front. So I need to just work out how long I want the front and the back. So that one's going to be a little bit longer than the side, back a little bit shorter than that one. And they'll gradually get shorter, so it forms this kind of shape at the bottom. And then also I want more fullness at the back than the front. So whereas I've drawn all these exactly the same, I'm going to draw my centre front with a little bit of fullness added, and that's the same as this piece here. Then I'm going to add a bit more fullness on my side seam, and then on my back I'll add a bit again. I'm exaggerating this a bit just so you can see. So what I'm going to end up with is a centre back piece which is quite full and a little bit longer, and then a centre front piece which is shorter and not so full. So you can see the difference in the shapes of those. And then the other two pieces will be somewhere in between. They'll gradually get less full as they go towards the front and shorter as well. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense before I start making the pattern for these pieces here. So what you need to decide on is how long you want the front of your skirt part from the waist to the hem, how long you want the back, and the shape of this. If you're having quite a big dipped hem, you might want to take a measurement at the side as well. I'm only going to have a slight difference. I just like it a little bit longer at the back, and I like it a bit fuller at the back. It's just the design I want. You don't have to do that. You can do this exactly as you want. You can do it completely even. You can do it really exaggerated. It's totally up to you. So just make sure you've got that front measurement and the back measurement, or they could be the same, and just get a rough idea of how full you want that hem to be. So I've worked out some rough measurements for the length of my front and the back and how full I want my skirt from a dress that I have. And that's always a good way of doing it if you have a similar dress. So I'll show you the centre front first. So this is my centre front line here where the edge of the paper is. And I'm just going to mark the hem point here. And then I need that measurement to be 48 centimetres. So I'll mark that there. And that's where my centre front piece now needs to be stuck on. So I need to just make sure that this lines up perfectly here and stick that on. And then all I'm going to do is measure the width that I've worked out that I want. So I want my centre front panel to be 38 centimetres across at the bottom. So I'm going to half that to 19 as this is cut on the fold. And then all I'll do is just join this line up here. So that is the centre front skirt piece done. I'm gonna play around with the hem in a second, so I'm not actually gonna cut the hem length. I've just left that little mark there. But what I'll do is I'll cut down here, as I'm pretty sure this is exactly how I want it. Just make sure when you're doing this that the fullness means that at the point where it's your hip, which is approximately about between 21 and 25 centimetres below your waist, that's where your hip line is. Just make sure it's big enough to go over your hip. But if you're adding lots of fullness into this, then you don't really need to worry. So that's the centre front done. And I'm going to do exactly the same with my centre back. So this is my centre back line here. I've measured the hem. So I have measured this 53 centimetres. So it's 5 centimetres or 2 inches longer at the back than the front. And I've marked the position of the waist, and then I just need to stick my centre back bodice piece on. And then I need to do exactly the same as I did at the front. So the width that I'm doing at the back is 55 centimetres for the whole piece. So for half of it, because this is only half of the pattern, it's 27.5 centimetres. So I'm just going to mark that across. And then I'm going to just join from this position here up to the waist. I always like to keep my mistakes in so I can show you how easy it is to make them. So I had looked at the wrong measurement for the length of my back, and it should be 53 centimetres, which is here. So I'm just going to cross that out. So easily done. So that's my centre front and centre back together. So you can see if I line the waists up, there's a little bit of a dipped hem, and obviously the back is a lot fuller than the front. So let's just put those aside, and I can now do the side front and the side back. So this is the hemline for the side front, and I'm going to draw up 53 centimetres, which is the same as the centre back. And then I'm going to work out the lengths of the side back and the side front in a second. But I'm just going to draw that up there. I need to make sure I position my piece enough that I can get the full width on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark one side of this panel. And I know for my side front that I want the total width to be 38 centimetres. This is just based on a dress that I measured against. I'm going to find the halfway point on that. So half of 38 is 19. And then I'm just going to draw a line up to where the waist is. And this will just show me where I need to position my piece here. So the easiest way to find the middle of that is just to simply fold it in half and put a little crease on it. And then what I need to do is line this crease up with the line I've drawn here and just put it on perpendicular to this line. I can do it parallel to the dot and crosses to line up with this point here that I've drawn up from the hem. Hopefully that all made sense. So that gets stuck on there. Make sure you put the right piece on, and then I'll just do exactly the same as I did on the others and join the waist with the point on the hem here. And now I can just cut these pieces out, and again I'm going to just leave the hem for now. And I'll do exactly the same with the side back. I'm going to do it exactly the same length as this, but I'm going to do it a little bit wider. Mine's going to be 46 centimetres in total. So all I'm going to do is exactly the same process with that different measurement. It's hard now to get all these in shot, but that's basically my centre back, my side front, and my centre front. So now I need to just look at the hem to make sure this is right. So if I now turn them this way, so these are all in the right position. So just make sure you've got them lined up properly. And then what I'm going to do, where this waist point is here, I'm just going to put a little tiny bit of tape to hold them together. But I'm going to be separating them again in a second. So you only need a little bit, but just make sure that waist matches up perfectly. And now I can look at my hem. So if I just move this top bit here out of shot, you don't need to look at that. All you need to look at now is this hem, which just about fits on the screen. So this point here is my centre front. This is my centre back. And I just need this hemline to be a nice continuous curve. So I'm going to start with the centre front, and I'm going to just draw that straight across. And then I'm going to put that mark on my side front there. And then on the back, I'm going to do exactly the same. I'm going to draw across in a straight line here. And that's pretty much lined up with that anyway. And then what I need to do is I just need to make sure this looks good. So I don't want this coming down to such an angle. It looks more exaggerated on the back because it's a lot wider than what the front is. So you need to basically just play around with this until it's just a nice continual curve. In an ideal world, you'd have something really long that you can bend around and get a perfect curve. But unless you've got an incredibly long piece of metal or plastic that's going to bend perfectly, you're not going to be able to do that. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to do this in sections. So I'm going to ignore this line because it's so far off because it's quite wide. So I'm going to just draw a curve that I think looks right. And then I'm going to carry on from that one. So this point here is the same length as the back. I know I don't want it quite as long at the side, so I'm going to come up a little bit and I'm going to just draw that in there. And now what I can do is I can just go in between the two of those and draw a better curve there. And then I just draw little arrows. If I've got two lines and I'm not sure I'm going to remember which one's the correct one, just draw a little arrow. And then I'm just going to do exactly the same here at the front. So this needs to curve a little bit. So that just needs to come up very slightly. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to line it up at the front there. And then that's just sitting, I don't know if you can see it or not, that's literally 1/2 centimetre approximately above where I'd drawn that straight line. You can see it now. And then this is the same length as the centre back. I don't want it anywhere near as long as that. So I need to now think about how this is going to join up with this piece here. So you can kind of get an idea just by putting something like this. So I'm just going to do that as a little temporary line there. And now I'm going to draw in this piece. And you just need to do a little bit at a time. If in doubt, you could always just cut the whole skirt a bit longer than you want it and just pin this on you. Obviously, you don't want to be wasting loads of fabric. So you don't want to cut it loads longer than you need it. But if you're not sure this is going to be right, then at least by doing that, you know you can always make it shorter. So this looks like a pretty regular curve to me. And then what I'm going to do, I just need to make sure it doesn't suddenly go up at the sides. So I'm just going to measure this point here. So that's 49 centimetres. So that's 1 centimetre longer than my centre front. And then at this point here, it's 50 centimetres, so it's getting slightly longer. And then 53 here, which is the same as at the back. So I'm going to now cut that out as one continuous piece, just to make sure everything lines up perfectly. So I'm just going to just make sure these are lined up perfectly and just put a little bit of tape at the bottom and do that for each of those. And then when you cut it out, rather than doing each of these separately, by cutting that as one continuous line, you know it all matches up perfectly. So I'm literally just going to cut around the whole of my hem. And there we go. Once that's cut off, you can see much clearer if this has bits that go to a point or if they go up or anything like that. And then what you can also do is just fold it at the side and you'll see there. So that's obviously much fuller at the back than the front, but you can see that's how the dipped hem is going to look. So I can now just separate all of these, and this is why I only put a little bit of tape on each of them so that they're nice and easy to separate. Make sure you don't accidentally cut the pattern. And I've then got all of my skirt pieces and I am pretty much ready to start making my dress. So this is my new strap piece. So my strap was absolutely perfect, but I'm going to be doubling it over. So I've just basically drawn exactly the same, twice the width. You could add a seam allowance on at this point as well, but it might get confusing if you add a seam allowance to this piece and not everything else. So I would either add it to everything or nothing, but that is entirely up to you. So that's basically my strap, twice the width, exactly the same length. And then the very last thing is a facing. This is a summer dress. I don't want to fully line it because it's going to be something I wear when it's really warm. So all I want to do is create a facing just to go around the top edge of the front and the back. So I don't need to make 4 pieces. I can do the back in one piece. In fact, you could even join these together on your dress if you don't want that seam on there. I just think it looks nice to have a seam and it continues into the skirt part of the dress. But for the facing, I'm just going to cut this all in one piece. So what I need to do, is lovely and easy, I'm going to just draw my centre back and then I'm just going to trace around the top and down there, and then I can line that up perfectly there. And then I can just trace around the top of that. And then, oops, it's not even drawn on. And then that comes down the side. And I need to just decide how deep I want it. I just want this to be quite a shallow facing, so 4 centimetres is enough. And I'm just going to draw that the whole length of this. So that is my back facing done there. And then for my front, I just need to do exactly the same thing. Obviously, I don't have a straight centre front, so I'm going to be cutting 2 pieces of this. It can't go on the fold, but I'm going to just join those 2 pieces there and just trace around the whole thing exactly like I did on the centre back. So I'll get that done and then I can draw the depth of this piece. So that's traced around there. So that is my edge. So just make sure it's a good solid line. And then let's just put those aside for a second. Just going to continue that down a little bit. So it's 4 centimetres on the back. So that's what I need to continue from the side. And then I just need to draw this with a little bit of a curve. So if I just do a 4 centimetre bit there, I don't really want it going down quite so low at the centre front because I've got all of those gathers. So I'm just going to do that to 3 centimetres at the front, and I'm going to have something to attach that to, so I don't have to worry about that popping up. I just don't want loads of bulk, and I'm just going to by eye just draw that shape in. And that's what I've ended up with. So it's only just a little bit shorter than 4 centimetres at this point here, but I just really don't want it to be too bulky at the front. So that is the front facing, that's the centre front position there. As I said, I can't do it on the fold because it's a slight curve. It's only very subtle, but I do need that curve there. And then that's obviously where my strap goes. Oh. I'm making a bit of a mess of drawing this. I've gone over these lines so many times now. I don't normally draw it as heavy as this if I'm not making a video. So just take your time getting those nice and accurate, and then they can be cut out. Again, you could add a seam allowance on at this stage because you know it all fits, but it's up to you whether you want to or not. I would, as I said, just do a seam allowance on everything or nothing. Totally up to you. Let's just write facing on there as well. So that's my last little bits now to cut out, and I am going to start cutting my fabric out to make my dress. I can't quite get all the bits in, but I just wanted to lay them all out so you can see exactly what you should have. So you've got the 4 pieces of the skirt, and then 4 pieces of the bodice, the front and back facings, and the strap. So I'm now going to just get all of these cut out and then I'll start putting it together. So I'm just adding a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance, which is the standard amount that I use making most of my stuff. I'm going to add that all around all of these pieces except the bottom of the facing here. I'm just going to cut that exactly where it is. So I'll go and get all of those cut out now. I've got everything now cut out. I can't quite fit the full length of this on the screen, but pretty much. So all of the skirt pieces are, other than the centre front that's on the fold, they've all just got 1.5 centimetres all around them. The same with all the bodice pieces. And then for my facings, I've not cut a seam allowance at the bottom, and I've cut both the main fabric and some iron-on interfacing because I want to have a little bit of structure at the top edge of this dress. And then for the strap, again, I've cut 2 pieces in the main fabric and the interfacing just to give it a little bit more stability. You don't have to do that. That depends what fabric you're using. But because I'm using a cotton poplin, it's quite lightweight. And without that, it's just not going to be structured enough for the top. If you're using a heavier fabric, then you might not need to use an interfacing as well. That's totally up to you. If you would prefer to do the dress lined, then you can ignore the interfacing pieces and just cut a lining exactly the same as your main fabric of your dress. So I'm now going to show you step by step how to put this together. I'm not going to show every single step on the sewing machine because I can't imagine you'd be doing this as a first project and you're going to have some basic sewing skills. So I will just show you step by step what to do, and then I will show you on the sewing machine if there's any bits that I think it would help to see. The first thing I'm going to do is the gathers on this centre front top piece. I don't want to gather all the way up to the top edge and the bottom edge because I need to leave some seam allowance. So my seam allowance is 1.5 centimetres, and I'm just going to go a couple of millimetres past there. So I'm just going to mark that position on the top and bottom of both of these centre front pieces. So what I'm going to do is just do a stitch on the sewing machine from pin to pin, and I'm going to do it with the longest stitch that my machine does. So if I mark with this pin where my seam allowance takes me to, I put 1.5 centimetres on, so that's where that point is there. And I just want to do a stitch line either side of this, a couple of millimetres either side, so that I can gather it up. So I'm just going to go and get that done now, and I'll do it in a contrast thread so you can see it really well. That's my 2 rows now done. So they're about 1/2 centimetre or just under apart. So what I'm going to do is put a pin back in either end, and I now need to just gather these up to measure 13.25 centimetres. So I'm just going to pull both threads, top and bottom, and then I'll get that to exactly the right measurement, and then what I can do is just wrap these around the pins like this. So if I start from that side, and then I can just line it up against my ruler, and I just need to fiddle around with it until it's exactly the right size. Don't worry about them being even for now, just do it until those pins are the right distance apart, and then you can ease the gathers in once you've got the right height. So that's now right. I need to make sure I don't accidentally move it while I just do the first couple of bits like that. And now that that's the right size, I can just play around with these to get them to look nice and even. So I'm just going to do exactly the same on the other one as well. Now that these are both done, I just need to make sure they're nice and even, and then just with a regular stitch length and the correct colour thread, I'm just going to sew in between these 2 lines. So that's going to be exactly where my seam's going to be sewn. So I'm going to line it up on the machine with 1.5 centimetres from this edge. So I'm just going to go and get that done. And then once you've sewn up the middle there, you should be able to take out the original threads without a problem. As long as you've not sewn over them, they should just pull straight out, and then you're just left with the nice gathers down the centre front. So I'm just going to get rid of the original threads on both of these. Now that I've got those gathers done, I need to start piecing some pieces together. But what I want to do is I want to overlock these before I sew up that centre front seam, and then I'm going to start paneling everything together. That is now going to stay nice and neat on the inside. You can imagine if I'd have done the overlocking before I gathered it up, that would have been really bulky there. So now that I've done that, I'm ready to start paneling everything else together. So I'm going to start by just putting the centre fronts together. And if yours have ended up very slightly different in length, you can ease these on at this stage. Once you've got them sewn together, you might decide once you try it on you want to gather it up a little bit more anyway, but you can really easily do that. So that's the centre fronts put together, and then I just need to join my side front onto here. So I'm just going to do right sides together and ease this on. If you've got a fabric that doesn't have much give, you might want to just cut a few little snips into this bit here, and it will just help just for easing that onto there. And then my centre back and my side back, I want to just join these right sides together as well. I've got my back pieces now pinned together ready to sew. I've put one side on the front, and then just to show you with this piece, by cutting those little snips in there, it just means I can open that up a little bit, and it just makes it much easier for me to pin this on here. So just ease it on, and you might need to cut quite a few little bits, but you can see by this bit there, hopefully you can see that well, it just opens it up. It just means that this goes on a lot easier. That's the front pieces all done. Don't worry about seeing that stitching, it's just because I haven't pinned it exactly on that seam line, but just sew it when you do it exactly on there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch all of these, and then rather than like this one doing them separate, this one's going to be pressed open. These I'm going to just overlock them together and trim a little bit off as I do it, and then they can be pressed to the side. So that's all of the bodice pieces ready to go, and while I'm doing those, I'm going to panel these up as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to join my back pieces together. So just down here, I'm not going to sew the centre back. I'm not going to sew the centre back together, and I'm not going to attach it to the front. So that's just these two pieces need to join together here. And then on the front, I'm just going to join my side front onto my centre front, exactly the same. So all of these I'm going to just pin together and then overlock and press. just make sure when you're doing it that you do this the right way around. So what I tend to do before I take the pattern piece off, I just put a pin at the top on both of these pieces on the side that needs to be pinned to my centre front, and then it means that once my pattern piece is gone, I don't get myself confused what's what. So once I open up that centre front, I just know that that side front with the pin there joins on there, and this one joins on there. It's very easy, as you can imagine, to get these pieces muddled once the pattern paper comes off. So I'm just going to pin these together all the way down from that waist seam to the hem, and I'll do exactly the same on the back. That's all my pieces now ready to sew up. So I've got the bodice, back and front. There is the skirt front, all 3 panels, and then I've got 2 lots for the back. I'm not sewing up the centre back just yet. So I'm going to get all of these stitched, and then I'm going to overlock them, and I'm going to press everything towards the side, and then I will show you what to do next. The only one, as I said, not being pressed to the side is this centre front, which I'm going to press open, and I will show you that in a second. That's all those pieces now sewn up and pressed. So you can see they're all pressed nice and flat. And I've laid all these out so you can see what you've got. Now, the reason I don't then join the front and back with the top separate to the bottom is because I always like to do the side seams all in one piece. And the reason for that is that if you ever want to let your dress out or take it in the future, it's a lot easier if you've just got one continuous seam down the side. So the next bit I'm going to do is join the bodice part to the skirt part. So the backs need to join together and the fronts need to join together, and it's as simple as that. So obviously right sides facing, just line up either side, and just exactly the same. These all need to be stitched and pressed. So I'm just going to get all of these pinned on. Easiest way to do it, and it's the same with the front, is just to pin either side, and then where the seam is, just put a pin through the seam, pin through the seam on the other piece, and you know that lines up perfectly, and then just fill the gaps. So that is the first piece now ready to sew up, and I'm just going to pin these 2 together exactly the same. On the front you've got the 2 side front seams there to line up, and just pin that across there. So I'm going to get these all sewn up and overlocked. So the dress is already starting to take shape. I've got my front complete and I've got my 2 back pieces done. So I'm going to put the front aside for now, and I'm going to put my zip in. So you can put the zip in once the front and back are joined together, but I always just find it much easier to do if you've got 2 separate pieces like this. So I'm just going to cut all of these little bits off. I don't want those getting in my way. So I just need to put my zip in. I'm going to use a concealed zip, which I would always recommend for a dress like this. It's never the easiest matching a colour when you've got a print like this, but this is near enough for me. So I'm literally just going to sew this in both sides. And I know that if I line the edge of my zip up with my overlocking, that's the right seam allowance there. And I just need to leave enough at the top so the seam allowance edge sits just above the little plastic stopper. So I'm going to pin this all in first. You can sew them without pinning them first, but because I've got this seam to line up, I want to make sure that's absolutely perfect. So I'm just going to do the top bit first, and then I can make sure that's lined up exactly the same there. And then I will just double check that that lines up on the waist seam before I pin further down and get this sewn in. So I'd always recommend a concealed zipper foot because you can get a little bit closer to the teeth if you do that. Let's see if this matches up. And it's about 1 millimetre off, which you might not be bothered about, but it bothers me. I want that to be exactly right. So I've just shifted that by 1 millimetre. It now lines up, so I just need to make sure that that is eased on, and then I can carry on just pinning it all the way down to the bottom. So that's absolutely fine on the top. I'll carry on pinning that to the bottom and then I can get this sewn on. If you want any extra detail on putting in a concealed zip, then there is a link above and below in the description for my separate invisible or concealed zipper tutorial. I've got that now pinned in both sides, and I've just pinned to the hem as well, just to make sure that everything is lined up perfectly. So there's not going to be anything puckering up on that back seam. So I need to just open the zip again to sew it on, and I'm going to use my, as I said, concealed zip foot to stitch as close as possible to the zip tape. If you don't already have a concealed zip foot, I'd recommend one. So the needle goes through the little hole. They are slightly different depending on what sewing machine you have, but that's where the needle goes through, and you've got these little grooves under here that your zip teeth go through. I don't know if I can get any closer. I think you can see that. So that's the opposite side, obviously. And the zip teeth go through there, or on this example, on that side. And it just means if you can hold that down while you're sewing, you can get really, really close rather than a regular zip foot. So I'm just going to get this stitched on both sides. My zip's now in, and you can see it's perfectly lined up here where the seam is. So just make sure you get that lined up perfectly. Obviously, if you've got a loud pattern like this, it's a little bit less obvious, but it's good practice to make sure that's perfectly lined up. So all I need to do now is just finish off my centre back seam, and I'm just going to come up here with a regular zipper foot just to go past the stitch line here just a tiny bit. Again, if you want any more detail, just take a look at my more detailed concealed zip video. So I'm just going to get that back seam done, and I can get all of this pressed, and then we're ready to move on to the next stage. This is now pressed, and this is why I love concealed or invisible zips. It just looks exactly like the other seams. You wouldn't even know that there was a zip there. Don't be upset if yours doesn't look as neat as this, if it's the first time you've ever done it. I've obviously done, in all the years I've been sewing, hundreds of these. So that is that now done, and the next thing is to join the front and the back, and then you've basically got your dress put together. All you've got left to do is just the hem, the straps and the facing. It is such a straightforward dress to put together. Lovely and straightforward. I am just gonna join these at the waist, just putting the pin through one and then straight through the other side so that they line up perfectly. And then I just need my tops to match up. Because it's at a slight angle, you're going to have that slight difference there, so just make sure they match where your stitch line is. And then obviously at the hem they're going to line up perfectly. And now I need to just finish off putting all these pins in down here. And as I said, the whole reason I like to do it this way, you can do the skirt and the top completely and then join them, but doing it like this, you can see now, if at any point you want to take it in, let it out, do any adjustments on that side seam, it's so much easier with it going the whole way through. So I'm just going to do exactly the same on the other side, and then I'm going to get these stitched, overlocked and pressed towards the back, exactly like all of these other seams. The next thing I'm going to do before I assemble my facing is I'm going to do some stay stitching. You can do this on the dress when these are all individual pieces if you want. It doesn't really make any difference. I've not done anything to stretch these while I've been doing these seams. So I'm going to stay stitch all around the top of the dress and around the top of the facing, front and back. So by stay stitching, I just literally mean a stitch line. So where your stitch line is going to be, for me 1.5 centimetres, you just need to go literally 1 millimetre across, because you don't want to stitch on that same line twice. So I'm going to get the stay stitching done on all 4 of those pieces and around the top of my dress, and then I can start assembling these pieces and finish my dress off. I can now put the main bit of my dress aside while I just concentrate on assembling these last bits. So this is very, very straightforward indeed. So for the straps, you literally just need to fold them in half with the right sides together and sew down one side. So I'll do the same with the other one. And then with the facing, that's my backs, that's my fronts. I just need to join all of those together.
So I'll pin my sides first. So make sure you line them up where the stitch line is, not where the edge is. And then the centre front needs to match up there too. I'm actually going to just overlock this bit here before I join these up, so I can then press that open. So I'm going to get that little bit overlocked and get all of these joined together, and I'll get my strap sewn up and then show you what to do next. My facing is now assembled. I decided to overlock the side bits separately as well to press those open, because with this interfacing it makes it that little bit more bulky that it just made sense to do that. So now that that's done, I can overlock down the centre back and all the way across the bottom here, all in one piece. And that's the facing now ready to attach around the top. So the last thing I need to do before I can attach it is to finish off my straps. Before I turn these straps around, I'm just going to trim my seam allowance down. Don't want it to go too short and weaken them, but there's not going to be any pressure on the width of these straps. And then what I'll do is cut one of them a little bit shorter than the other, and then when they're turned around, with that seam allowance being a little bit staggered, it just means all that bulk of the edge isn't going to be in the same place. So that's what you want to have. It doesn't matter if it's a little bit wonky. And then you don't need any kind of special gadgets like a rouleau turner to do these. You just need a decent sized safety pin. And all I'm going to do is just put the safety pin through there and just pull these through. And it's not going to be the easiest thing because my fabric's not slippery. If you've got a lovely slippery fabric, this is nice and easy. But with this cotton, it's not. So I won't bore you watching me do the whole thing. So just keep going and just pull this up as you go until the safety pin comes out of the opposite end. And you can see now I've got a little way down. It starts getting a lot easier to just pull this through as you go. You just need to learn the knack of just pulling that up. And then as soon as the safety pin comes out the other side, makes it that little bit easier. So that's my strap now turned round, and all I need to do is just push the seam there to the side and make it flat, and then I can give that a really good press. So I'm just going to get that done on this one and on my other one. And once they're pressed, they look perfect. So I now need to just attach these to the dress. So I'm just going to refer back to my sample that I did for the position. So I can see on the back, and make sure if you can see the line, I always iron mine so that the seam line is just slightly in from the edge. So make sure that sits underneath. And I also like to have the seam on the outside. Doesn't mean you have to do it that way, it's just something I always do. So on my sample, I lined the edge that's closer to the centre back with this seam, and it seemed to work well with my bra straps. So I'm going to do that exactly the same. So the way that that's going to go, you then want to flip it back, and I've cut exactly the same seam allowance as what the dress has, so that can just line up with the edge. And then I just need to do exactly the same on this side. So I've turned the dress over, and then I'm just flipping those up like that because I want to make sure they don't get any twist in them. If you don't double check, you might end up with it twisted or something. You don't want that to happen. So this one now needs to come on here. So I just need to check on my sample how I did it. So where this seam is here, it sits just to the right of that. So I need to line it up. I don't know how well you can see the seam coming down there, and I need to line the edge up with that where the top edge is going to be. So that's 1.5 centimetres from the top there. So I'm gonna just put that on there like that, and I will double check that with a ruler before I sew it. But that's that attached, and I need to just do exactly the same on this side. So I'm going to double check that, and I'm also going to try my dress on at this stage just to check that I'm happy with the length of those straps. And if I want to loosen them off or tighten them at all, it's so easy at this point here. You can also check that your dress fits how you want it to. So if you want to make it a little bit tighter, if it's a little bit looser, because sometimes your sample might be a different fabric, it might fit slightly different. It's really easy just to adjust this side seam. So just double check the straps and those, and while you've got it on, just check you're happy with the length as well. I've just tried it on and the straps fit perfectly. I'm happy with the fit, happy with the length. Everything looks great. I can't wait to wear it. I absolutely love it in this fabric. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch my straps on first, and that means they just get an extra row of stitching rather than just stitching on at the same time as my facing. So I'm just going to get these stitched on exactly where I've pinned them. So now that my straps are attached, I'm going to put the facing on. So right sides together, I'm putting the pin through that centre front seam and through the centre front on the facing. And I just need to pin it all the way around so I can line it up easily at that point, and then I can line it. I can't line it up at the side front seam because I don't have a seam on the facing, but you can see by the shape of it there if you've done it the same kind of shape as me, and then the side seam and the back. So I need to just pin that all the way around and just make sure your strap isn't sticking out the top. You want that tucked underneath and don't get it caught up. So I'm just going to get that all pinned on and ready to sew. Now that that is pinned on all the way around, it's easier to show you on this side as it's white. I just need to basically just attach it by sewing it 1.5 centimetres from the edge, and I'm going to pivot when I come to the centre front point here. When you start and finish at the centre back, you just want to do it just a little way up from where the zip seam is. So just do it about that distance. It's about a centimetre or just over a centimetre when you're doing it. So do that on both sides. This is how it should look once you've sewn it on. So just double check with the zip to the top that these bits here match up. I've sewn one slightly closer than the other, but you can see that they line up going across there. And just make sure you haven't got your straps caught, because that is not going to be ideal. And make sure these look like they're sitting at the right angle. So the next thing, once you've done that, is just to give all of this a bit of a trim and do some understitching. So I'm not going to trim loads off of the actual dress because it's such a lightweight fabric. It doesn't need loads coming off it. But I do want to take a fair bit off my facing because it's quite bulky, and that's going to end up really bulky around the top if I leave all that on. I don't want to take anything off the straps though, because there's only 1.5 centimetres on the inside, which is more than enough, but you don't want to cut that any shorter. And then at the centre front, you just need to cut down to that point. When you're sewing it, you could just not sew that top bit together, but it's fine just to either cut that at the end, or you can just unpick that seam a little bit. What I tend to do is just snip a little bit, and then you can just kind of pull those top couple of stitches apart. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to trim a little bit off from the front, going around that curve on my main fabric, and then I want to make sure I don't cut through the strap as I go across there. And then because this is scooped out a little bit, I want to go a little bit shorter on that bit. And then I'm just going to take a little bit off going around the back. I don't want to take too much off because it just gives it that little bit more stability across the back. Again, just be careful that you don't cut the strap at that point. And then I'm just going to leave it where the zip is for now, because I'll line that up when I finish the top. So I want that to have my 1.5 centimetres. So I'll do exactly the same as that around the other side of the main fabric. That's now trimmed on both sides, and I'm just going to do exactly the same with the facing. I'm not going to go right to the back, but I just want to take this a fair bit shorter just because it's quite bulky. How much shorter you go will really depend on how bulky the fabric you've used is and how much it frays. You don't want to go too short if it's going to fray quite a bit. So I'm just going to trim that all the way around. Sometimes I prefer to do the understitching before I trim it, and sometimes I do it after. So do it whichever way around you want. So I'm gonna do some understitching now. So literally a couple of millimetres over from where the seam is, and I'm gonna start a couple of centimetres from the centre back, and I'm gonna work my way around, and then And then when I get to the strap here, I'm going to stop just before the strap, and then I'm going to start again just the other side of the strap, and then I'll come round the front and go all the way to the centre front here, and then I'll cut the thread and I'll start it again for the other side, so I can pull all of this around the other way. You can do it in one go, but I prefer to do it as two separate pieces. And then I'll just do exactly the same on the other side. So I'll just go and get that all stitched now. So when you're stitching this, what you need to do is just make sure all the seam allowance is going to the right there, and then your facing just sits over it there. So I'm just going to stitch down this bit. And then what I generally do is I just line this inside bit of my foot here up with the seam where I put the facing on with, and that gives me a decent distance for sewing that all the way around. And then once you start coming up, when you get to the front strap, you'll notice that it gets harder to do this understitching because of the angle of this. So you want to stop just before you get to the strap. So hard to do this when I'm holding the foam with my other hand. So about there, and I'll just do a couple of reverse stitches, and then I'll stop that and I'll start again the other side of the strap. And then once you get to the centre front here, you just want to stop exactly where that seam is there and do a couple of reverse stitches. And then I'm just going to cut the thread, and I'll just do exactly the same around the other side. That's all now done, so just make sure you haven't got any loose threads or anything that just still need to be pulled out or trimmed off. And this all just needs a really good press around the top, and then you can fix the position at the centre front with a little stitch here, and then you can do the same at the sides. And if you want to, you can do one on this side front seam here as well, and it will just help that facing all stay in place. But I usually give it a good press before I put these little stitches in. So just a little hand stitch is all you need. So the last bit I need to finish on the facing is just this little bit at the back. So if you've not done this before, all you need to do, and this is why we don't sew all the way to the end, is you just need to have the facing sticking out a little bit past your main fabric. So it's about 1/2 centimetre. And then you just need to sew down here. So make sure you don't go too close to your zip teeth, because you don't want to stitch through those. And that's just going to finish this off. So I'm just going to get that done on both sides. And then when you sew down this bit, just put your regular zip foot on, and then you can get nice and close. You don't want to get too close. This stitch line here is where I sewed my zip on, and the teeth are sitting just here. So you just want to be, it's kind of between 1/2 centimetre and 1 centimetre across from there. And you just need to basically sew down there. So this is how it looks once it's done. So you're going to have a little ridge on the dress side, and it's going to be tighter on the facing side. And then when you turn it the right way round, you'll see why. And it's because it keeps the facing that little bit further away. So the last bit is just to finish this off at the top. So because you've got extra there, when you fold it back like this, because you've used more seam allowance on this side than this side, it helps it stay flat. And that's why you don't want to do your understitching too close to the back, because you now need to sew across here. So all I need to do is where the seam is, where I've put my facing onto the dress, I need to just carry it on, going across all of these layers right to the end, and do a few reverse stitches. So all I need to do is just line that up in the same place where I've been using all along, and just literally sew across to the end. Once you've done it, just turn it around to make sure nothing's got caught up and it looks right. And then what you need to do is a bit of trimming. The more bulky your fabric is, the more trimming you're going to need to do, because you need to turn that round and for that to look nice and neat. So I'm going to just trim quite a bit off here, because with the interfacing it is quite heavy. Just take all of those off, and I'll just keep trimming this until I feel like it looks good on the other side. And you can see the difference there of the one that I have trimmed and the one that I haven't. And then once I give that a good press, then that's going to look even neater, and it will be a perfect finish at the centre back of your dress. You can put a little hook and eye there if you like as well. And that is now finished and ready for a good press, and then I'm just going to sew a little hook and eye at the top just to hold that together properly at the top. I need to do a little bit of finishing around the top. I just need the hook and eye, a lot of pressing, and I need to just fix these little bits of facing. And then the very last bit is the hem. So what kind of hem you do really depends on what kind of fabric you've got. Because this is just an everyday dress and it's a cotton, I'm just going to overlock this and I'm just going to do a single fold hem upwards to finish it off. And I'm just going to sew that with a machine. So that's my simple hem finished. It's all pressed at the top. I just need to do the little bit of hand stitching that I said about. So I'm just going to do one in the centre front, and I'm going to do a little stitch either side on the side seams, and I'm not going to fix the front and the back unless I feel like I need to when I try it on, because you generally don't need to stitch this down in too many places. A lot depends what your fabric's like. So I'm just going to get these little hand stitches done and then I can try it on.
I showed you it at the beginning, but I always like to show it again at the end. So here is my finished dress once again. And I really hope you've enjoyed this tutorial and you'd like to go and make this dress. If you have enjoyed it, then good luck making your dress, and make sure you check out my other videos and subscribe as I add new tutorials every week.